Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Anatomy by Dr. Vijaya. Today I have selected a neuroanatomy topic which is the brain stem. So brain stem, it includes medulla oblongata, pons and midbrain. So definitely I can't do a long video, so I have divided this video into three parts. So today will be the first part where I'll be covering the external features of medulla oblongata and the internal features where I'll be focusing on the different sections of the medulla oblongata. Okay, let us learn about the external and internal features of the brainstem. So as I mentioned earlier in my introduction that this video mainly covers the external and internal features of medulla oblongata. So brainstem includes midbrain, pons and medulla oblongata, which occupies the posterior cranial fossa. So brainstem connects the narrow spinal cord with the expanded forebrain, so which includes as you have learnt in the embryology, the parts of the forebrain includes the structures which are developing from telencephalon and diencephalon. So brainstem mainly connects these two parts of the brain, that is the spinal cord with the forebrain. So here in this picture you can see, so this is the lateral view, so where you can see the purple one represents the medulla oblongata, orange one is the pons, and this is the midbrain. Okay, so medulla oblongata and pons mainly develops from rhombencephalon. So rhombencephalon again divides into mesencephalon and myelencephalon, and midbrain mainly develops from the mesencephalon. So this is a sagittal section where you can see the three parts of the brain stem. So if you see the brain, so this is the inferior view or the base of the brain. So you can see this is the anterior or the ventral aspect of the brain stem. So this part is the medulla oblongata, okay, and this is the pons, and here you can see the peduncles of the midbrain, okay. So this mainly shows the ventral aspect of the brain stem. So connecting the narrow spinal cord below here, and this is the expanded forebrain, so which includes cerebral hemispheres, the thalamus, hypothalamus, basal nuclei, all these structures. So if you see the functions, what are the functions of the brainstem? So brainstem mainly contains, it is made up of different nuclei and also white matter. So since brainstem connects the spinal cord with higher centers which are developed from the forebrain, so the brainstem, it acts like a conduit for the ascending and the descending tracts by connecting the spinal cord to the different parts of the higher centers in the forebrain. Okay, so you can see the white matter. So just like a spinal cord, you know the development of the nervous system. If not, please check my video on the development of the central nervous system. So brainstem has the same features of the spinal cord, having a gray matter inside and white matter outside. So the white matter includes different tracts, some are descending, some are ascending up, so mainly connecting the spinal cord to the different parts of the higher centers. Not only that, the brainstem also contain important reflex centers, so mainly they are associated with the controlling of the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system, and also the control of consciousness. So all these are present in the brainstem. So if you see, for example, if you see medulla contains the respiratory and the vasomotor centers, so these are mainly carried out by a special reticular system. So there are special nuclei which are called as reticular nuclei, which are spread around the brainstem, so mainly in the medulla and the pons. So these reticular system or reticular formation, they mainly control the respiratory, cardiovascular system, and also it controls the consciousness. The brainstem, as you all know, that it also has the nuclei for the cranial nerves. So 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Among that, the first and second mainly develops from telencephalon and diencephalon. The rest of the cranial nerves from 3rd to 12th, they have their nuclei spread over the brain stem. So if you can see, midbrain mainly has the nuclei 3rd and 4th, that is oculomotor and trochlear. Pons has 5th, 6th, 7th and 8th, that is 5th is trigeminal, 6th is abducent, 7th is facial, 8th is vestibulocochlear. Medulla oblongata has the remaining, that is the glossopharyngeal, vagus, cranial accessory and hypoglossal. So these cranial nerve nuclei, they are situated in the brainstem and the fibers arise from the brainstem. They all, along with the tracts and these nuclei, they also contain other nuclei, which includes red nucleus, substantia nigra, colliculi, superior and inferior colliculi. Then they have Olivary nuclear complex, like superior and inferior olivary nuclei and trapezoid body. So these are the different nuclei having different function, which you will be knowing or you will be learning as we proceed. So this is a picture showing the dorsal surface of the brainstem, okay, the posterior surface. So here you can see this is the medulla oblongata, the pons, okay. So here the upper part of the medulla, okay, and the pons, they are expanded, and at the dorsal aspect it mainly forms the floor. The medulla oblongata and the pons, they mainly form the floor of the fourth ventricle, okay. And you can also see the different nuclei, the cranial nerve nuclei, okay, and functionally the cranial nerves are divided into different types, which I have discussed in my development of central nervous system, like general somatic efferent, then general somatic afferent, then special visceral efferent. So all these are different types depending upon their function. So they are distributed throughout the brain stem. So now let us concentrate more on the medulla oblongata, the external, coming to the external features of medulla oblongata. So here you can see mainly the anterior surface, the anterior view of the brainstem. So here is the medulla oblongata. So if you see the medulla oblongata, the lower part is, it looks same as a spinal cord, so it is narrower, it's kind of tube-like, but at the upper part they get expanded. As I mentioned, it forms the floor of the fourth ventricle. The posterior surface will form the floor of the fourth ventricle. So if you can, the lower part, the lumen of the medulla oblongata, so lower part, it is narrower, just how it is seen in the spinal cord. So there it is called as the central canal, the cavity, and upper part, since it gets expanded and forms a part of the fourth ventricle, okay. So at the lower part, the cavity is called the central canal, and the upper part of the medulla, since it is expanded, so there the cavity is called as fourth ventricle. So here you can see the anterior surface. So at the midline, just like in the spinal cord, there is a fissure, okay. So this fissure is a little bit deeper, so that's why it's called as fissure. So this is anterior median fissure, because it lies on the anterior surface at the midline, so that's why it's called as anterior median fissure. On either side of the anterior median fissure, at the upper part, you can see two swelling on either side of the median fissure. So those swelling are called as pyramid, okay. So this pyramid mainly consists of the tract, the corticospinal tract. So the fibers which are coming from the cerebral hemisphere, okay. The pyramidal neurons, their cell bodies are situated in the precentral gyrus of the cerebral hemisphere. So the axon fibers, from there they descend down, okay, the descending tract travel through the brainstem, okay, and here in the medulla oblongata they form a swelling. So that swelling is called as pyramid. So mainly they consist of corticospinal fibers, that is the main motor fibers of the descending tract. So lateral to the pyramid, you can see one more swelling, okay, which you can see here, which is oval in shape, like an olive. It looks like an olive. So that is called as the olive, okay. So this is pyramid. and lateral to the pyramid on the posterior lateral aspect you can see 2 more swellings on either side, so that's called as the olive. So between the pyramid and olive you can see the rootlets of the hypoglossal nerve. Okay, next to the olive, so here is the olive, so lateral to the olive, so it goes to the posterior surface. So there you can see a peduncle called as inferior cerebellar peduncle. So here you can see this is the posterior lateral aspect. So here is the olive, and lateral to the olive as you go, so that goes to the posterior surface of the medulla. So there you can see here one more swelling. So that's the peduncle, inferior cerebellar peduncle, which connects the medulla to the cerebellum. So all the parts of the brainstem, that is the medulla, pons and midbrain, they are connected to the cerebellum by 3 peduncles. So that is the inferior, middle and superior cerebellar peduncle. So here is the inferior cerebellar peduncle connecting the medulla to the cerebellum. So cerebellum will be on the posterior aspect, so it gets connected. So here you can see the inferior cerebellar peduncle, so it is connected to the cerebellum. So this is middle cerebellar peduncle, this whole thing. Okay, and superior comes from the midbrain. So between the olive and inferior cerebellar peduncle, so you can see some more rootlets, nerve fibers of the 3 cranial nerve, glossopharyngeal, vagus and cranial accessory. Okay, so here you can see the rootlets of the hypoglossal nerve, which is between pyramid and olive, and between olive and inferior cerebellar peduncle. So at that area you will be seeing the rootlets of 3 cranial nerve, glossopharyngeal at the top, then the vagus, and this is the cranial accessory nerve, that is 9, 10 and 11, and 12 will form the hypoglossal. And when you go to the most posterior surface, the lower end of the medulla, so you can see another 2 pairs of swelling. So the medial most, so this is the posterior median sulcus. Okay, so this is the posterior median sulcus. On either side of the posterior median sulcus, you will see a pair of swelling. So those swelling are called as the gracile tubercle, and lateral to the gracile tubercle there is one more pair of swelling that is called as cuneate tubercle. Okay, so there are 2 pairs of tubercles, that is the cuneate and gracile tubercle. So this will represent the nucleus of the posterior column, the dorsal column. Okay, so if you can remember the tracts of the spinal cord, so there are different ascending tracts carrying different sensation, the spinothalamic, then you have spinocerebellar, then you have spinotectal, spinoreticular, all these. So one more ascending tract is the dorsal column or the posterior column. The main function of this tract is to carry proprioception, 2-point discrimination, okay, and the fine touch. So all these sensations are carried through posterior column. So these posterior column, they come and relay in these nuclei. So there are nuclei present in the medulla, so that is called as the cuneate nucleus and gracile nucleus. So they form the swelling called as gracile tubercle and cuneate tubercle. Okay, so they mainly gets fiber from the posterior column or the dorsal column. So you can see here the posterior surface. So this is the posterior median sulcus, the gracile tubercle, cuneate tubercle formed by the gracile nuclei and the cuneate nuclei. Okay, and lateral to that you have this inferior cerebellar peduncle, and as you go more laterally you will go to the anterior surface having olive and the pyramid. Okay, so this is mainly showing the posterior surface, so that's why you're not seeing the olive and the pyramid. And this is the lower narrow part, which has the same features of the spinal cord, where it looks like if you see the medulla, it is like a conical in shape. So the upper part of the medulla is expanded to cover a cavity, that's the 4th ventricle. So this is the 4th ventricle. So 4th ventricle, so the floor of the 4th ventricle at the upper part is formed by the pons and the lower part is formed by the posterior surface of the medulla. So here you can see this is the upper part. So there also you will see different areas Okay, so you will be seeing vestibular area. So if you see the vestibular cochlear nuclei, there are different nuclei. They are spread throughout the pons, and also some nuclei are present even in the upper part of the medulla at the junction, pontomedullary junction. You can see, so that forms a vestibular area. Then you have hypoglossal triangle having hypoglossal nucleus. Then you have vagal triangle having the vagus nucleus. Okay, so all these are seen at the upper part of the medulla, which mainly encloses the fourth ventricle. So posterior surface of the superior half of the medulla oblongata forms the lower part of the floor of the fourth ventricle. Now, coming to the internal features, so that was the external features of the medulla oblongata. Now, coming to the internal features, where you will be learning different section at the different level of the medulla. So, there are three, the internal features of the medulla oblongata are studied in three sections. So, one, the section is at the level of motor decussation or the pyramidal decussation, which is at the lower part. So, there will be two sections at the lower part, which is the closed end of the medulla, because it encloses throughout a cavity, that is a central canal. And the third, that is the second section, is at the level of sensory decussation, that is the medial lemniscus. The third and the last section is at the level of the open end of the medulla, that is at the upper part where it is enclosing the fourth ventricle. So that level is at the level of olive, where you can see the olivary nuclear complex. So the internal features of medulla oblongata are studied in these three sections. So before I go into the internal features of the medulla oblongata, I would like to discuss the clinical aspect related to the internal features. So this is a case 1. A 68-year-old man was admitted to the hospital with sudden onset of severe dizziness, vertigo and vomiting. He also complained of hot, painful sensation in the skin of the right side of the face. So mainly he is having the exaggeration, or sometimes later it can lead to loss of pain, especially on the right half of the face. On physical examination, the uvula deviated to the left side when the patient was asked to say R. That's called as R test. Mainly they are testing for the glossopharyngeal nerve, and there was lack of mobility of the right vocal cord as seen on the laryngoscopic examination. The patient also showed drooping of right upper eyelid, that is ptosis, sunken right eye, so the patient even had anophthalmos, and constricted right pupil, the miosis. There was evidence of impairment of pain and temperature sensation in the trunk and extremities on the left side. So the signs and symptoms which I have highlighted in the bold letter. Okay, so we will be looking through all these signs and symptoms, why the patient has this. So by having the knowledge of the internal features of the medulla oblongata. So this is mainly a condition called as pica syndrome, or also called as lateral medullary syndrome, or lateral medullary syndrome of Wallenberg. Okay, so it mainly it is due to the neurological deficit seen on the lateral aspect of the medulla. So mainly due to the impairment in the blood flow. So the lateral part of the medulla is mainly supplied by posterior inferior cerebellar artery, which is called as pica, okay, P-I-C-A, or pica syndrome. Okay, so this mainly the deficit will be on the lateral aspect of the medulla, which leads to all those signs and symptoms. So you will understand better once you know. You will come to know what are the features seen on this section, especially on the lateral aspect of the medulla. So this is called as medial medullary syndrome or Dejerine syndrome, because the deficit is seen on the medial aspect of the medulla. So once you know the structures present in different section, so you will be able to correlate with the clinical aspects. So let us know about the internal structure. Let us learn about the internal structure of medulla oblongata in detail. The first section, so we will go from below upwards. The closed medulla, that is at the level of decussation of pyramids, okay, where the corticospinal fibers, they cross over. Okay, so this table will summarize the main structures present at this level. Okay, so you will be seeing the following nuclei. As I mentioned, this is a closed medulla. The cavity enclosed will be the central canal because it's a continuation of the spinal cord. Okay, and you will be seeing some nuclei. Okay, some the white matter which consists of motor tract and the sensory tract. So the nuclei includes nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus. So these are in relation to the fibers forming the dorsal column. Okay, so in the spinal cord section you had learnt the dorsal column or the posterior column. Okay, so these fibers, they ascend up and they relay in these nuclei. That's called as the nuclei gracilis and cuneatus. The other nucleus you will be seeing spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve and accessory nucleus. So spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve mainly carries pain and temperature sensation from the head and neck region. That's mainly from the face and the neck areas. So trigeminal nerve, the fifth cranial nerve, you know that it has three divisions: ophthalmic, maxillary and mandibular. Among these three divisions, so trigeminal nerve, cranial nerve is a mixed nerve. So among that, ophthalmic is purely sensory, maxillary is also purely sensory, and mandibular is mixed because it has motor and also sensory fibers. So the cranial nerve, trigeminal nerve mainly carries sensation from the face, that is a general sensation which includes pain, touch, temperature, pressure, two-point discrimination, proprioception. So all those from the head and neck region, so from the face, is mainly carried by the trigeminal nerve by these three divisions. And also the muscles of mastication, so all the muscles and all the muscles which develops from the first pharyngeal arch, so those muscles are supplied by mandibular nerve. So that's why mandibular division of trigeminal nerve is a mixed nerve which has both sensory and motor fibers. Okay, so this trigeminal nerve, since it is carrying all the general sensation from the face, okay, so they have three nuclei which are distributed throughout the brainstem. So those three nuclei are spinal nucleus, which is situated in the medulla. Then it has principal or the main nucleus, which is present in the pons, and mesencephalic nucleus, which is present in the midbrain. So this spinal nucleus, it gets fibers, the sensory fibers. So all these nuclei, if you can see the spinal nucleus, so it gets sensory fibers which are carrying pain and temperature. Okay, so pain and temperature sensation. Okay, the fibers which are carrying pain and temperature sensation goes and relays in the spinal nucleus, which is present in the medulla. It also slightly extends even to the pons. Okay, but the main nucleus is present in the medulla. Okay, then you have the touch and pressure. Okay, so the touch and pressure sensation from the face, so that goes and relays in the principal nucleus or the main nucleus. And the last sensation, that is a proprioception, that is a joint sensation, so that mainly relays in the midbrain. Okay, proprioception mainly relays in the mesencephalic nucleus. So this is how the general sensation carried from the face, so they are relayed in the different nuclei which is present throughout the brainstem. So that spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve is present, you can see in the section. So when you take a section at the medulla oblongata. So what is accessory nucleus? So this accessory nucleus also it is called as accessory cuneate nucleus, which is located in the medulla. So these nucleus are related to a tract called as cuneo-cerebellar tract. Okay, so if you can remember spinocerebellar tract, there are different divisions in the spinocerebellar tract. Okay, spinocerebellar tract. So the spinocerebellar tracts, they are mainly concerned with carrying, so the name only tells it runs from spinal cord to the cerebellum. Okay, so they mainly carry the unconscious proprioception, okay, the touch and pressure, the unconscious, that is the joint sensation which is not under our conscious, but whatever the movement, the joint movement, whatever the sensation you are feeling in the space, which is unconscious in nature. So for example, though you are in a particular posture, you know where your limbs are located and how what is the position of your limbs, so you are aware of that. So but that is unconscious. You are unconsciously you are aware of your joint sensation, the different touch and pressure. Okay, so that unconscious sensation of proprioception, touch and pressure, so they are mainly carried by spinocerebellar tract. The conscious proprioception is mainly carried by the dorsal column. So on unconscious one is carried by the spinocerebellar tracts. Okay, so this, because you know that cerebellum mainly helps in controlling our posture, the balance, and also it helps in coordinating the movements. Okay, so and it also maintains the tone. So for that those information has to go to the cerebellum, and also it has to get information from the higher centers. Okay, so that it can work and help in maintaining our posture, balance, and the tone. Okay, so from the spinal cord the information goes to the cerebellum through these tracts, spinocerebellar tract. And if you can remember, under spinocerebellar there are posterior spinocerebellar, or also called as dorsal spinocerebellar tract. Then you have anterior spinocerebellar, also called as ventral spinocerebellar tract. The other one is cuneo-cerebellar tract. Okay. So this posterior spinocerebellar tract mainly carries this unconscious proprioception, touch and pressure from the trunk, the upper part of the trunk area. So that is mainly from the spinal cord level C8 to L1 or L2. Okay, anterior or ventral spinocerebellar carries below from that. Okay, so this is mainly from the trunk and the lower extremity. So those are carried from posterior and anterior spinocerebellar tract. Okay, so this is from C8 to L1 L2 level, and this is below that L1 L2 level and below till the coccyx. Okay, so those unconscious proprioception are carried through these two tracts, the posterior spinocerebellar and anterior spinocerebellar. But from the head and neck region, that is from above C8, okay, that is mainly from the upper extremity and the head and neck region. So those sensation, unconscious sensation, is carried through cuneo-cerebellar tract. So this cuneo-cerebellar tract, once it ascends, it goes in relays, okay, in the accessory cuneate nucleus, which is located in the medulla. Okay, so that's why it is related to cuneo-cerebellar tract. Once it relays in the accessory nucleus, from the accessory nucleus a group of fibers arise. So those are called as posterior external arcuate fibers. Okay, so the fibers which are arising from accessory nucleus, so they are called as posterior external arcuate fibers, which goes to the cerebellum. Okay, so it passes through this peduncle, inferior cerebellar peduncle. I have already mentioned this inferior cerebellar peduncle mainly carries fibers from the medulla to the cerebellum. Okay, so the connection is between medulla oblongata to the cerebellum. Okay, so the fibers which are arising from accessory nucleus, so they form posterior external arcuate fibers, which goes to the cerebellum carrying the information. Okay, so that's about the accessory nucleus, and I've already told about the spinocerebellar tract. And there are other tracts as well. The other one is fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus, which is related to the nuclei gracilis and cuneatus. So these are concerned with, so these are related to the dorsal column. So they are mainly concerned with conscious proprioception, 2-point discrimination, fine touch. So all those passes through from our body, passes through the dorsal column. Then once it ascends in the brainstem, they are called as fasciculus gracilis and cuneatus, and they relay in the nuclei gracilis and cuneatus. Okay, then other tracts are, you also have the spinothalamic tract. Okay, spinothalamic thalamic tracts. So under spinothalamic there are two, lateral spinothalamic and anterior spinothalamic. Okay, so this spinothalamic, lateral spinothalamic mainly carries the sensation of pain and temperature, and anterior spinothalamic mainly carries crude touch and pressure. Okay, these tracts mainly carry sensation that is pain and temperature from our body. It's carried through lateral spinothalamic tract, crude touch and pressure by anterior spinothalamic tract. So they ascend up, from the spinal cord, they ascend to the medulla oblongata, and from there to pons, midbrain, and then it goes to the thalamus. Okay, so from, if you remember, pain and temperature, touch and pressure from the face is through the trigeminal nerve. From the rest of the body is through spinothalamic tract. Okay, and also you have other tracts, minor tracts like spino-reticular, spino-tectal. So these are related to the reticular. So spino-reticular is related to the reticular formation, the reticular nuclei, the way we react to the pain and different sensations. So they are mainly controlled through the spino-reticular. Then you have spino-tectal. Tectum is the part of the midbrain. Okay, so from the spinal cord, the sensation goes to the tectum, so that this will coordinate the movement of your eyeballs according to the sensation, different sensation. Okay, so these are other minor tracts, but mainly you have to know the spinothalamic, spinocerebellar, then spinal tract of trigeminal nerve, then the accessory nucleus. Okay, and nucleus gracilis and cuneatus. A very important event which occurs in this section is the decussation, the crossing over of corticospinal fibers. Okay, so here you see the section. So since it is a closed medulla, so you're just seeing the central canal, and this is the layer of gray matter over here. Okay, all the nuclei are present here, then the tracts over here. So you can see here, so the nuclei, this is nucleus gracilis, nucleus cuneatus, the tracts, the fibers which are coming over here, they are called as fasciculus cuneatus, fasciculus gracilis. This is spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve, the spinal tract of trigeminal nerve. Okay, then you can see this is the pyramid, and you are seeing the decussation, the crossing over of corticospinal fibers. Okay, also you can see other tracts, spinothalamic tract, then spinocerebellar tract, anterior and lateral, anterior and dorsal or posterior spinocerebellar tract. So these are the structures you see. So decussation, so very important event which occurs here, where the most of the fibers, 80 to 90% of corticospinal fibers which are coming from the cerebral hemispheres, that is mainly from the precentral gyrus of the cerebral hemisphere, so they cross over at this level. Okay, so they arise mainly from the precentral gyrus. They also come from other areas as well, but the fibers are mainly coming from the pyramidal cell bodies which are present in the precentral gyrus of the cerebral hemispheres. Okay, so they arise. So this is picture, animated picture showing from the one side. So you can see the axon fibers are arising. They pass through the internal capsule which is present over here. Okay, then they come to the midbrain, anterior aspect of the midbrain. Then they travel through the pons, and then once they come to the lower part of the medulla, so they cross over. Okay, 80 to 90% of the fibers cross to the opposite side. Okay, so and then they continue as lateral corticospinal tract. So the fibers, 80 to 90% of the fibers which cross over or decussate in the medullary region, so they continue the below, even in the spinal cord, as lateral corticospinal tract, because they are located at the lateral aspect. Okay, so they continue as lateral spinothalamic tract. And they relay with the anterior gray horn cells, and then the information goes to the muscle fibers, so that there is execution of the action by the contraction of the muscles. Okay, so they mainly supply the muscle fibers. Okay, some like 10 to 20% of the fibers, they don't dissociate at the level of spinal the medulla. Okay, so they descend as anterior corticospinal tract, but even they cross over, but they cross over at the level of the spinal cord. Okay, so this is just a minimal number of fibers, that is around 10 to 20%, but most of the fibers, they dissociate at the level of medullary area. So very important aspect you have to know here: whenever there is neurological deficit, whenever there is a trauma or impaired cerebral blood flow which can lead to neurological deficit, so you have to know the level of crossing over. For example, if there is any damage at this level, okay, so remember this is the crossing over area. Okay, so if there is any damage, so neurological deficit will be seen on the ipsilateral side. Okay, so if there is damage to the lateral corticospinal tract below the crossing, okay, the signs and symptoms, so mainly if the corticospinal tract is injured, if it is damaged, the patient might present with paresis, that is weakness in the movement. Okay, or sometimes it can be plegia, hemiplegia. Okay, so it depends upon the number of fibers which are involved. Okay, the amount of fibers which are involved. So they might have hemiplegia or hemiparesis, okay, or a partial weakness. Okay, so if the damage is below the crossing, so any crossing, it's not only related to the motor dissociation. So that's why you have to know, even in the sensory fibers, you have to know the level of dissociation. So if there is any damage below the crossing, so the signs and symptoms are seen on the ipsilateral side. So here if there is a damage, okay, the patient might present. So for example, this one is left side, this is right side. So the damage is here. The patient will have left-sided hemiparesis or hemiplegia. Okay, below that level. But if the damage is above the crossing, so at this level, somewhere in the midbrain or somewhere in the pons or somewhere in the upper part of the medulla, that is above the dissociation, so the patient will present with contralateral hemiplegia or contralateral hemiparesis. Okay, because if the damage is here, so these fibers are mainly supplying to the opposite side of the muscles. Okay, so since they are supplying, because they cross over here, so that's why the patient will have on the opposite side, that is the contralateral side. So this you have to remember, whether the damage is above the crossing, at the level of crossing, or below the crossing. So this is again showing the corticospinal fibers. You can see both anterior corticospinal tract, which are not crossed over here, so they are just descending down, but they cross over at the level of spinal cord. Okay, but lateral corticospinal tract, they cross over and then descend down as lateral corticospinal tract. So both the tracts, they establish connection with the anterior horn cells in the anterior gray column of the spinal cord. So that's about the closed medulla, the level of dissociation of the pyramid. Now let us know let us go on to the next section, the level of dissociation of the at the level of dissociation of medial lemnisci. So this is sensory dissociation, because this is the crossing over of sensory fibers. Earlier it was the crossing over of motor fibers. So here it is the crossing over of sensory fibers. So you will be seeing almost same features, but there are some difference. If you can see motor tract, so this is little bit above that level. So there you are seeing just the pyramid, which is having corticospinal fibers which are not yet crossed. Okay, so the crossing occurs below this. Okay, below the pyramid. So I had shown in the earlier picture, at the upper part you were seeing on either side of the anterior median sulcus the swellings. So those are called as pyramids. Okay, so below that swelling, okay, so the dissociation occurs. So that is motor dissociation. Okay, so first section was at that level. So this is just above that, okay, which is at the level of sensory dissociation. So there you don't see crossing over, you're just seeing the pyramid having corticospinal fibers. So for example, if there is a damage at this level, so this is above the crossing, so definitely patient will have contralateral signs and symptoms. Okay, so remember that this is an example because decussation is occurring below this level. Okay, so since the damage is above the decussation, the patient will present on the contralateral side. So here you are just seeing the pyramids. The nuclei is all same: nucleus gracilis, nucleus cuneatus, spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve, then you see accessory nucleus, then you will see an extra nucleus over there, that is the hypoglossal nucleus. So I had already mentioned that 9, 10, 11, 12. So all the nuclei of all these cranial nerves, they are situated or located in the medulla oblongata. So one of the nucleus is hypoglossal, which you can see at the level of this decussation. Okay. The sensory tracts over here, as I mentioned, there is decussation over here. So you will be seeing decussation of medial lemnisci. So I will come through what is this medial lemniscus. It is nothing but the tracts related to gracilis and cuneatus. Then you also see spinothalamic tract, spinal tract of trigeminal nerve, spinocerebellar. Okay, and again this is a closed medulla, so that's why the cavity is central canal. So here you can see, so this is a section at the level of decussation. So you are seeing the pyramids over here. Okay, so all other, so this is fasciculus gracilis and cuneatus. This is medial most is the gracilis, then lateral most is the cuneatus. You can see the nucleus here, nucleus gracilis, nucleus cuneatus. So you will be seeing the crossing fibers here. So these fibers before crossing, they are called as internal arcuate fibers. Once they cross over here, you can see the crossing over here. Once they decussate, they continue above, they ascend up. After crossing over, they ascend up as medial lemnisci. Okay, so the crossing over is called as the sensory decussation. So once they decussate, these group of fibers will be called as medial lemnisci. Okay, so that's why it's called as decussation of medial lemnisci. So after that they ascend as, again lemniscus means group of axon fibers carrying a same function. So at different level they gave different name. Fasciculus is also same, then tracts, lemnisci, so all are same. These are group of axon fibers carrying a particular function. Okay, so medial lemnisci, so the fibers were coming from nuclei gracilis and cuneatus. So they form second order neuron, which are called as internal arcuate fibers. Okay, so if you can remember, the sensation goes through the dorsal root ganglia. So that is the first order neuron. So in the dorsal root ganglia, it has a cell body, two processes. One is a peripheral process, the other one is a central process. Peripheral process carries the sensation from the periphery, enters to the dorsal root ganglia, that is a cell body, and from the central process, the impulses, the sensory impulses are carried to the spinal cord. Okay, so this forms the first order neuron, and this fibers, they ascend up, come to the nuclei gracilis and cuneatus. Okay, and from there second order neuron arises. So you know that all the sensory fibers have different order neuron. Okay, they'll relay at different level. So once they relay, so there will be generation of another order neuron. So first order neuron is from dorsal root ganglia, come to the spinal cord till they come to nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus. Okay, so what they carry? They carry fine touch, vibration and proprioception, which is conscious proprioception, all these. Okay, so from the gracilis and cuneatus, so they travel through fasciculus gracilis and cuneatus, then come to these nuclei, and from these nuclei, whatever after relaying, after this fasciculus gracilis and cuneatus relays in these nuclei, after relaying, the second neuron which are arising, they are called a second order neuron, which are named as internal arcuate fibers. So these internal arcuate fibers, they decussate, and after they decussate, they form a lemnisci, which is called as medial lemniscus. So on both the sides, lemnisci is plural, lemniscus is singular. So they form medial lemniscus which ascend to the higher center. So they ascend through the pons, then midbrain, then they go and relay in the thalamus. Okay, the nuclei in the thalamus, VPL, ventro-posterior lateral nucleus present in the thalamus. So that is a second relay over there. So from there, third order neuron arises which goes to the post-central gyrus of the cerebrum. Okay, so these internal arcuate fibers immediately cross over, they dissociate. Okay, so the dissociation occurs anterior to the grey matter and posterior to the pyramid, which you can see here. So this is the anterior aspect of the medulla, this is the posterior aspect. So the dissociation occurs posterior to the pyramid, and this is the grey matter area, so anterior to the grey matter. So once they dissociate, they form medial lemniscus which ascend to the higher center. So this is about the dissociation. Okay, so which you can see over here. Along with that, there will be one more nucleus present in this level, that is the hypoglossal nucleus. Okay, that is the cranial nerve, the 12th cranial nerve. So that's about the closed medullary section. Now coming to the last section, which is at the uppermost aspect of the medulla, that is the open portion, which is at the level of olives. Okay, you had seen in the external features lateral to the pyramid there was a swelling which is called as olive. So this section is at the upper aspect, so passes across the inferior part of the fourth ventricle. As I mentioned, this is the open medulla where there will be expansion of the medulla. Okay, so the cavity will be converted into, the central canal will be converted into fourth ventricle. So it passes across the inferior part of the fourth ventricle, and also the amount of grey matter will increase due to the presence of many nuclei at this level. Okay, so which you can see this. So this table will mention all the nuclei. So you will be seeing, already you know what is spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve, hypoglossal nucleus you already know. So other nucleus is the nuclei of other cranial nerve, that is glossopharyngeal, vagus and cranial accessory. So they have their nucleus, but they are not named as glossopharyngeal nucleus or vagus nucleus. So they are named in different, they are named as different nucleus because glossopharyngeal and vagus has different function. Okay, nucleus ambiguus, dorsal vagal nucleus, nucleus tractus solitarius. Okay, so these are related to glossopharyngeal and vagus nerves, cranial nerves. Then you will also see some of the vestibular and cochlear nuclei as well. Mainly these nuclei are present in the pons, but since it is at the upper part at a near to the pontomedullary junction, some part of the nuclei are also seen in the vestibular and cochlear in the medullary section. Okay, but the main nuclei are present in the pons. Then a very important, since this is olive, so olive, the swelling which you see, the olive is mainly due to the presence of a nuclear complex called as Olivary nuclear complex. So main content is inferior olivary nucleus. So this gives the main fibers to the cerebellum. Okay, so that also seen in this level. Then motor tract, corticospinal fibers will be seen. So corticospinal fibers are also called as pyramidal tract. Then sensory tract, as I mentioned, so there no more there you won't see the dorsal column because already the dissociation has occurred, and the fibers will be called as the second order, the internal arcuate fibers which dissociate. So they ascend as medial lemniscus. You will be seeing spinothalamic tract. So slowly the lateral and anterior spinothalamic tract, they merge together to form spinal lemniscus. Okay, so here still they are tracts, but as they go to the pons level, so no more they are called as spinothalamic tract because anterior and lateral they merge together. The fibers will join together to form a lemniscus called as spinal lemniscus. Okay, you also see spinal tract of trigeminal nerve, the cerebellar. So mainly you will be seeing anterior spinocerebellar tract but not posterior spinocerebellar, because posterior spinocerebellar tract, since it has to go to the cerebellum, so they pass through the inferior cerebellar peduncle below this level and enter the cerebellum. But anterior spinocerebellar tract, they ascend till the midbrain, and through superior cerebellar tract they go to the cerebellum. So that's why this tract continues until midbrain, but posterior spinocerebellar, so they are only at the closed medullary level. They enter inferior cerebellar peduncle and enter the cerebellum. So that's why you are not seeing posterior spinocerebellar tract. You are just seeing anterior spinocerebellar. Even cuneo-cerebellar is not seen here because they also pass through, as I mentioned, after relaying in the accessory cuneate nucleus. The fibers arising from there, which are called as posterior external arcuate fibers, they also pass through inferior cerebellar peduncle to enter the cerebellum. Okay. You also see one more fasciculus here, medial longitudinal fasciculus, which I will be talking later. Okay, and the cavity present here at this level is the fourth ventricle. So here you can see the picture, the section. So you can see the cavity has expanded. So this is the inferior surface of the fourth ventricle. Okay, you can see the pyramid here. You will see one more nuclei over here, so which lies medial to the pyramid, that's called as arcuate nuclei. So these are the nuclei extending from the pontine, the pons area. In the pons, when we learn about the section at the pons, you will be learning a nuclei in the pons called as pontine nuclei. So some of the nuclei extend little bit to the medullary area, superior aspect of the medullary area. So here they are called as arcuate nuclei. Okay, so these carry some of the corticospinal fibers to the cerebellum. As I mentioned, though the motor function is controlled by the cerebrum, okay, the fine movements, the coordination, the control of the tone, the balance, posture is mainly helped by cerebellum and the basal nuclei. Okay, so the fine movements, the coordination all occurs due to the controlling system from the basal nuclei and the cerebellum. So some of the information from the cerebrum has to go to the cerebellum, okay, so that it can work upon it, so that the movement can occur in a smooth, finer way, okay, in a coordinated way, okay. So some of the corticospinal fibers from the pontine nuclei and some from the arcuate nuclei, they enter the cerebellum, okay. So those are called as again arcuate fibers, but these are called as anterior external arcuate fibers. So you came across two arcuate fibers, one is posterior external arcuate fibers, the other one is anterior external arcuate fibers. Posterior external arcuate fibers are related to cuneo-cerebellar tract, which I had mentioned earlier now. So it's arising from the accessory cuneate nucleus, but these anterior external arcuate fibers are related to these arcuate nuclei and the pontine nuclei, which is going to the cerebellum. So they carry the information from the corticospinal tract. Okay, so this is the Olivary complex, the inferior Olivary nucleus, which you can see in this section here. Okay, and you can also see some of the vestibular and cochlear nucleus present over here. This is the inferior cerebellar peduncle and you can see other this is hypoglossal nucleus, which is medial most. If you can remember the development of central nervous system, so mainly these nuclei are arising from the two plates, the basal plate and the alar plate. Okay, so basal plate mainly contains the motor, the efferent nuclei, and the alar plate are mainly concerned with the sensory or the afferent nuclei. In the spinal cord, when you see the development of the spinal cord, basal plate was anteriorly placed and alar plate was posteriorly placed, and these are differentiated by demarcated by sulcus limitans. But as it goes to the brainstem, it is from the upper part of the medulla, due to the expansion laterally, so the two plates are placed beside. So you can see basal plate on the medial aspect and alar plate on the lateral aspect. Okay, so that's why these hypoglossal nucleus, dorsal vague, all are concerned with efferent, so they are located at the medial aspect, and those which are concerned with afferent, they are located on the lateral aspect, which are arising from the alar plate. Okay, so let us know about each nuclear complex, the nuclei present in this section. So one of them was the Olivary nuclear complex, which you can see in this section over here, the complex. So the crumpled one, so this is the inferior Olivary nucleus. Then you have some accessory over here, dorsal accessory and medial accessory Olivary nucleus. So these are the smaller one. The larger one is this one, the inferior Olivary nucleus. So what's the function of this nucleus? So these are gray matter shaped like a crumpled bag. So mainly the inferior Olivary nucleus. Okay, so they get afferent fibers mainly from the spinal cord, cerebral cortex and cerebellum. Okay, so they receive the information from all these three areas. From the spinal cord, they are called as spino-olivary tract. Okay, they also get information from the cerebral cortex and cerebellum as well. So the efferent fibers which are arising from this nucleus, so they enter the cerebellum. Okay, the cells of the nucleus send fibers medially across the midline to enter the cerebellum, which is through inferior cerebellar peduncle. Okay, so these fibers are called as climbing fibers. So if you can remember the anatomy of cerebellum, okay, the internal structure of the cerebellum. So cerebellum has different nuclei. So internal cerebellar nuclei, you have dentate, globose, emboliform, okay, vestigial. So along with that, it has fibers, which two main types of fibers. One is climbing fibers and mossy fibers. Okay, so mossy fibers are all other fibers which are coming to the cerebellum except the fibers which are arising from inferior Olivary nucleus. So the fibers which arise from inferior Olivary nucleus, so they are named as climbing fibers. So they pass through inferior cerebellar peduncle and enter the cerebellum and mainly takes the information. Okay, so the function of the Olivary nuclei, it's mainly related, as I've told earlier, basal nuclei and cerebellum. They are mainly concerned with voluntary muscle movement. Though the information or the stimulus comes from the cerebral cortex, those movements are made finer and the movements are coordinated and they are made smoother, so that the posture is maintained, the tone is maintained and the balance is maintained mainly from the information coming. It's mainly controlled by the cerebellum and the basal nuclei. Okay, so the main function of the Olivary nuclear complex, it takes the information coming from spinal cord and cerebral cortex, goes to the cerebellum as climbing fibers and mainly helps in controlling the voluntary muscle movements. Now next, coming to the other nuclei, one of the nucleus present in this section is nucleus ambiguus. Okay, so this nucleus is mainly concerned with special visceral efferent. As I mentioned, functionally the cranial nerve nuclei has different types. Okay, so efferent have different types, afferent fibers have different types depending upon their function. So one of them is special visceral efferent. Okay. These are special because if you can remember, if you go through my development of central nervous system, I have explained about these different types. So these fibers mainly supply the muscles which are arising from the pharyngeal arches, okay, which are developing from the pharyngeal arches. So there are different pharyngeal arches. There are 6 pharyngeal arches. Among that, 5th one is rudimentary. So each pharyngeal arches are supplied by different nerves. The first pharyngeal arch is supplied by mandibular division of trigeminal. Second pharyngeal arch, the muscles arising from there are supplied by facial nerve. Then third, fourth, sixth are mainly supplied by this glossopharyngeal, vagus and cranial part of accessory nerve. So these 3 nerve fibers which are mainly supplying, so from the remaining, the 4th and 6th arches, the muscles of palate, the muscles of pharynx, the muscles of larynx, they all develop from those pharyngeal arches. So these muscles of palate, pharynx and larynx, so they are supplied by the fibers coming from nucleus ambiguus. Okay, so that's why these are called as special visceral efferent fibers. Even the facial nerve also has special visceral efferent because it supplies the muscles of facial muscles. Then mandibular division of trigeminal also considered as special visceral efferent because they supply muscles of mastication which are developing from first pharyngella. So these are categorized under special visceral efferent because the fibers mainly supplies all the muscles and structures arising from the pharyngeal arches. Okay, so the muscles of palate, pharynx and larynx are supplied by pharyngeal plexus and also some of the fibers from the vagus. So if you see larynx, anatomy of larynx, the muscles of larynx are mainly supplied by branches of vagus nerve, that is recurrent laryngeal nerve and superior laryngeal nerve. Okay, so all these fibers, cell bodies are located in nucleus ambiguus. The next is dorsal vagal nucleus. This nucleus represents general visceral efferent. Okay, so mainly it the visceral sensation so mainly the visceral organs, that is the muscles, the smooth muscles and glands of the respiratory system, GIT system and the heart. Okay, so they are supplied by the vagus nerve. Okay, so so the afferent fibers to this nucleus they are mainly controlled from the hypothalamus, and also there are carotid sinus reflexes. So whenever there is stimulus, so it goes to this nuclei, dorsal vagal nucleus, and then accordingly the efferent fibers are sent and the actions are elicited. So this is mainly this is purely related to vagus nerve. So they mainly provide origin to preganglionic parasympathetic fibers which mainly supplies the heart, smooth muscles and glands of the respiratory and gastrointestinal system. So this is mainly concerned with vagus nerve. But nucleus ambiguus, so name only tells, so it is related to different nerves. Okay, so the nerves which mainly supplies the palate, larynx and pharynx. So it goes to three different cranial nerves: glossopharyngeal, vagus and cranial accessory. The next nucleus is nucleus tractus solitarius. So this represents the special visceral afferent. Okay, the name only tells afferent because it carries special sensation, that is the taste sensation. Okay, so it receives taste fibers. So afferent means it's going towards the central nervous system. So it receives taste fibers mainly from facial nerve, glossopharyngeal nerve and vagus nerve. Okay, so facial nerve, that is taste sensation from anterior 2/3 of the tongue. And then glossopharyngeal, taste sensation from posterior 1/3 of the tongue, and as you go most posteriorly, part of the epiglottis and also some part of the palate. So the taste sensation from there, it is mainly carried by vagus nerve. Okay, so mainly these taste fibers from these three areas, they are carried through the branches of these three cranial nerves, the facial, glossopharyngeal and vagus. Facial, the branch is called as chorda tympani. Okay, so that carries the taste sensation, because if you see vagus, glossopharyngeal and facial has different function, it is a mixed nerve. Okay, so the taste fibers, they come and relay in the nucleus tractus solitarius. Okay, so these are the different nuclei present at this level of the medulla. Okay, so they represents fibers which goes to the three that is the three main cranial nerve: glossopharyngeal, vagus and cranial accessory. If you see hypoglossal, it is purely somatic efferent fibers. Okay, somatic efferent means it supplies the skeletal muscles of the tongue. Okay, it is only concerned with motor. Okay, so that's why it has only one nucleus, that is hypoglossal nucleus. Now coming to the clinical aspect, so before I started with the internal features, I mentioned about two main clinical aspects related to medulla, that is the lateral medullary syndrome, also called as Wallenberg syndrome, and medial medullary syndrome. Okay, Dejerine syndrome, also called as Dejerine syndrome. Okay, so these are mainly related to the impairment of blood flow. Okay, as I mentioned, lateral medullary area gets its blood supply from posterior inferior cerebellar artery. Okay, and medial medullary area mainly gets supplied from the vertebral artery, branches of vertebral artery. So if there is impairment in these, any block in these branches, so that leads to impaired blood flow, and it leads to neurological deficit. So they are represented. So how, when a patient comes with different signs and symptoms, so how do you differentiate whether lateral medullary area is involved or medial medullary area is involved? So it depends upon the structures which are present in the medial medullary area and the lateral medullary area. So if you can remember the lateral medullary area, so these are the nuclei which are present. One is nucleus ambiguus, which you already know what is the function of ambiguus. It has the fibers, that is which goes to the glossopharyngeal, vagus and cranial accessory, and mainly supplies the structures of the palate, pharynx and larynx. So definitely patient will have difficulty in speaking, the patient will have difficulty in swallowing, dysphagia, okay, and also the vocal cord might be involved because the vocal cord is supplied through the branches of the vagus nerve, okay. So if nucleus ambiguus is involved, so if you can remember the case, I had given a history that patient had difficulty in speaking, difficulty in swallowing, which is dysphagia. Then if the spinal, on the lateral aspect, you also see the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Okay, the spinal nucleus, what is the function? It mainly carries pain and temperature from the face. Okay, so this doesn't cross over, they don't cross over, so that's why the patient will have ipsilateral pain and temperature loss from the face if this tract or the nucleus is involved. Okay, so definitely these are located in the lateral medullary area, which you can see over here. So lateral medullary area, so mainly has the spinal tract and the nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Then it has nucleus ambiguus, all these are present over here. Okay. Then if it involves vestibular nuclei, as I mentioned in that section at the upper part, there is also few vestibulocochlear nuclei are also related, and the patient will have mainly the vestibular nuclei are mainly present over there. So the patient will have dizziness, vertigo, they have difficulty in balance and posture, nystagmus, that is oscillatory movements of the eyeball, okay, tinnitus and abnormal sound within the ear, the internal ear. So these might be the signs and symptoms, okay. Then you also see some of the sympathetic nuclei which mainly controls the sympathetic function of the head and neck region. So they are located in the medullary area, especially on the lateral aspect. So over here, okay, sympathetic one. So there are reticular system which mainly sends descending fibers which controls the sympathetic system, mainly the head and neck region. So if this sympathetic system is involved, so the patient will have Horner's syndrome, okay. So Horner's syndrome is related to the sympathetic chain which is mainly involved in controlling the sympathetic function of the head and neck region. So the patient will have ptosis, the drooping of the eyelid, okay, and meiosis, that is there will be constriction of the pupil, there is no sympathetic supply, so the pupil will be in a constricted state, okay, anhidrosis, that is there will be loss of sweating. If you see, whenever there is a sympathetic stimulation, the patient will have excess sweating, okay. Since here sympathetic system is damaged, the patient will have loss of sweating, so that's called as anhidrosis. The patient will have meiosis and ptosis, okay. So this combined effect is called as Horner's syndrome. And you also see the lemniscus over here, which can be seen here as it ascends up the spinothalamic tract. It forms a lemniscus. So as it is at the pontomedullary junction, you will be seeing this lemniscus over here, okay. So that's called as a spinal lemniscus. So this spinal lemniscus is involved, or spinothalamic tract is involved. So mainly, if you can see here, still it is a tract over here. So once it ascends to the pontomedullary junction, it forms spinal lemniscus. So here you are still seeing the spinothalamic tract. So if that is involved, so the patient will have, since this is above the crossing, if you can remember, spinothalamic tract, they cross over at the level of spinal cord. Okay, so since the damage is above the crossing, so that's why the patient will have contralateral loss of spinothalamic, mainly carries pain and temperature. So there will be contralateral loss of pain and temperature from the body. Okay, so if you see these signs and symptoms, then you can relate. Okay, might be there is a lateral medullary area is involved, and it can be due to impairment in the blood flow. So mainly it is supplied by posterior inferior cerebellar artery. So Wallenberg or lateral medullary syndrome. So patient will have contralateral loss of pain and temperature, ipsilateral loss of, so you can see there is dissociated sensory loss. So on the body there will be contralateral loss, but on the face it will be ipsilateral. Okay. Then the vestibular nucleus is involved, vertigo and nystagmus. Then loss of taste. If nucleus tractus solitarius is involved over there, the patient might have loss of taste sensation. Then hoarseness due to the involvement of the laryngeal muscles, dysphagia, difficulty in swallowing. Okay, so this is due to the involvement of nucleus ambiguus. Okay, now coming to the next syndrome, medial medullary syndrome, where there will be involvement of medial aspect of the medulla, and the medial aspect of the medulla is mainly supplied by branches of vertebral artery. If there is any impaired blood flow to the branches which are supplying the medial aspect of the medulla, it leads to the neurological deficit. So the nuclei involved over here is hypoglossal nerve and the nucleus. Then the tracts are involved, because on the medial aspect mainly you will see the pyramidal tract. Okay, and also you can see, if it is on the upper aspect, you can see the medial lemniscus involvement. Okay, so here you can see the pyramid will be involved. If the pyramid is involved, the corticospinal fibers are involved, and since this is at the upper aspect and above the crossing, so the patient will have contralateral hemiplegia or hemiparesis depending upon the amount of fibers involved. Okay, and also there will be involvement of medial lemniscus. Okay, so the medial lemniscus is those crossed fibers which are carrying conscious proprioception, fine touch and vibration. So since it is again above the crossing, so medial lemniscus is after the crossing, so definitely the patient will have contralateral loss of proprioception, fine touch and vibration. Okay, the main symptoms which you see in a patient suffering with the medial medullary syndrome is involvement of hypoglossal nerve. Okay, so it depends. You can see here though the nucleus is not involved, the nerve is damaged over here, hypoglossal nerve, which is exiting through here. Okay, sometimes if the deficit extends to the dorsal aspect, it may also involve the hypoglossal nucleus. Okay, so definitely the patient will have wasting of the tongue muscles. Hypoglossal nerve mainly applies the muscles of the tongue. So ipsilateral, there will be wasting of the muscle. There will be fasciculations of the tongue whenever you ask the patient to protrude. Okay, and when you ask the patient to protrude the tongue will deviate to the ipsilateral side, that is to the damaged side. Okay, because this is occurring below the crossing. Usually the corticonuclear fibers, if you can remember what is corticonuclear fibers, so these are the fibers coming from the cerebral cortex and goes to the different cranial nerve nuclei which are present in the brain stem. Okay, so even they are controlled from the cerebral cortex. Okay, so even hypoglossal nucleus, they get corticonuclear fibers. Okay, so the crossing occurs before they come to the hypoglossal nucleus. Okay, so the crossing occurs above here. So since it is below the crossing, so the hypoglossal nerve, so the tongue will deviate to the ipsilateral side. Okay, so these are the main signs and symptoms in these two syndrome, lateral medullary and medial medullary syndrome. So that completes the external and internal features of the medulla. Okay, so this is my reference, the clinical neuroanatomy by Snells. So that completes the first part of the brainstem. So I have covered the external and internal features of medulla oblongata. So in my next videos, the next two parts, I will be covering the features of pons and midbrain. Thank you for watching.